News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow.
Karen, President Trump is taking a harder line with Iran with the 60-day memorandum of understanding between the two countries officially expired. The president says he is not interested in seeking an extension, and now he's making a new threat to bomb Oman if that country gets in the way of the U.S. blockade in the Strait of Hormuz.
Would you say you're out of patience with Oman, a strategic partner?
No, I don't think they behave very well, but we handle them very easily, just like we do other things.
President Trump spoke to reporters from the White House as Iran and Oman continue negotiations on how to manage the strait. Bloomberg Middle East correspondent Abir Abu Omar has more from Dubai.
From the Iranian side, we know that there's a lot of complexities when it comes to finding that mechanism and a way around just finding those paths in the Strait of Hormuz to reopen and get oil moving once again through the waterway. That is when it comes to that agreement that is happening between Oman and Iran.
Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar reports the U.S. is not part of those negotiations, but President Trump insists the U.S. has total control of the strait, and he likes the idea of declaring it U.S. territory.
Well, Nathan, a marathon meeting between U.S. negotiator Jared Kushner and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu left the fate of the Gaza ceasefire unclear. Officials signaled moderate optimism after yesterday's talks, but offered no concrete commitment by Israel to the latest U.S. proposed plan. American negotiators appear to acquiesce to Israeli demands that Hamas disarmament must come before any reconstruction of the devastated Palestinian enclave.
Another geopolitical news, Karen. Chinese leader Xi Jinping is going to forego a stop in New York to address the UN General Assembly when he visits the U.S. next month. Politico is reporting Xi will be in the U.S. for 3 days. The highlight will be a meeting with President Trump on September 24th. This comes after the two leaders met in Asia last spring.
Now to the latest on trade negotiations between the U.S. and Canada, Nathan. President Trump and Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke by phone yesterday about 24 hours before the U.S. is due to implement punishing new tariffs on Canadian products. Negotiators have been working for days to try to craft an agreement that would avert 50% duties on a range of U.S. imports from Canada, including milk, beer, plywood, and hockey equipment. Sources say automotive sector rules are proving to be a major obstacle toward an agreement.
And Karen, President Trump is keeping up his push to overhaul this country's voting laws. In a social media post, he urged Congress to pass the Save America Act and held up India's voting system as an example to follow. He says India's chief election commissioner recently asked how the U.S. could hold elections without requiring voter ID. The Justice Department says it plans to send 1,000 monitors to watch voting during this year's midterms in November. We discussed that with the head of DOJ's Civil Rights Division, Harmeet Dillon.
We are still formulating our final list, but, the places where there may be language issues, the places where there may have been access of disability rights issues, places where there may be voter fraud issues that we've seen. We've had some prosecutions. I think you've seen some of those. There'll be some prosecutions in the pipeline of people who voted illegally who should not have.
Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon tells Bloomberg's Balance of Power her plans are consistent with DOJ policy, but she says the number of election monitors will probably be historic for a Republican administration.
And speaking of elections, Nathan, it's primary day in Florida, Wyoming, and Alaska. And Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports.
We begin in Florida, where voters will choose nominees to replace Governor Ron DeSantis and to complete the remainder of Secretary of State Marco Rubio's Senate term. The state will also hold its first congressional primaries since adopting a redrawn district map designed to boost Republican candidates in November. Voters in Wyoming and Alaska will choose nominees for governor, Senate, and the House. And Alaska voters will also decide on a statewide ballot measure to impose contribution limits on state and local political campaigns. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Amy, thanks. Turning to markets now, futures are lower following yesterday's declines on Wall Street, and 30-year government bonds continue to drop around the world, pushing yields to multi-decade highs. We get more on the big moves from Bloomberg News executive editor Mark Cudmore.
look, we've got fiscal incontinence in most countries in the world, but particularly, or most relevantly, I should say, out of the US. And we've also got an inflation problem with clear, high energy prices, and not just high kind of crude prices, but high-end oil product prices, whether gasoline or diesel, etc., which affects the consumer. And again, particularly relevant for the US, and the US is the world's most important market, kind of drives the rest of the world in this. They've had inflation above target for 5 years now. So, you've got fiscal incontinence at a time when they can't control inflation. And up until very recently, the economy looks very hot as well.
It's Bloomberg's Mark Cudmore. In a note this morning, market strategist Ed Yardeni said there's no reason to panic on the U.S. bond just yet.
And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm Nathan Hager, and this is Bloomberg.